I don't think it's going to be a particularly hot take to say that Monster Hunter Wilds has an amazing large monster roster. What might be a slightly hotter take is that, in my opinion, I think it is the strongest monster roster in the entire franchise, in terms of creature design, combat design, and of course, monster variety. And now that the game has been out for about a month at time of recording, I wanted to sit down, take a look at the large monster roster, and give my thoughts on it. If you would have asked me a week after the game released, I would have said they were all 10 out of 10, nothing but bangers, start to finish. But now that I have had some time to let the hype die down, and live with these monsters for a while, smack them around a little bit and all that, I have a little bit more to say than just new monster good. So, with that out of the way, welcome to Roster Rundown, the show where I am going to be going through Monster Hunter Wilds map by map and talking about the monsters that call it home. What I love, what I dislike, and everything in between. In today's video, I am going to be going through the monsters that I have, without a doubt, spent the most time with through the original open beta, as well as just my initial hours with the game. Yes, today we are going to be taking a look at the wonderful monsters of the Windward Plains. Starting with everyone's favorite amphibian punching bag, Chatacabra. A very popular sentiment I've seen being thrown around online lately is that Chatacabra is the best first large monster in the entire franchise, and while I think a lot of that had to do with hype, I can't say I disagree. Chatacabra as a monster is designed to be the first thing that a hunter cuts their teeth on, and unique to Monster Hunter Wilds, Chatacabra is the first living creature that you swing a sword at in the game. While most other Monster Hunter games throw you at a couple small monster quests or gathering quests early in the game's progression in order to get you accustomed to your weapon moveset, in order to movement and gathering mechanics, Monster Hunter Wilds throws you into the deep end by throwing you at the first large monster from the jump, after spending maybe a minute or two riding around in the desert on your Sacred in a very scripted on-rails segment. For many new players, Chatacabra is going to be the first thing they fight. And so because of that, it has to be a monster that teaches not only how to play the game, but also accurately prepares the hunter for what they are going to face later in the series. And Chatacabra does that excellently. In terms of its combat design, it incorporates pretty much every one of the new mechanics that a weapon could use. It has an opportunity to do a power clash with its big charge attacks. It provides ample opportunity to practice offset attacks with its big, long wind-up for a slam attack. And it also introduces hunters to the wound mechanic by being small and compact enough that pretty much any weapon can hit any wound on Chatacabra at any time. In addition to all this innate tutorial design, where all of this is part of the fight, Chatacabra also, in the first time you fight it, the first story quest of the campaign, there are occasional pop-ups that are teaching the hunter how to use their weapon, whether it be introducing you to new mechanics that were added in Wilds for veteran players, or just the basics of sharpening your weapon, or making sure that you are keeping an eye on your health, things like that. And for a lot of new players, this could be seen as too hand-holdy, but it is 100% necessary for people who are new to the franchise, which I will always be in favor of the game having an easier onboarding process as someone who has got many friends into the Monster Hunter series and essentially has to act as a Monster Hunter Sherpa, guiding them through the overly convoluted nonsense. I will always be happy to see Capcom making that early game onboarding process a little bit easier, especially when it is with a monster that has such a fun design and a fun fight. Chatacabra being an amphibian and a big brute bruiser ticks all my boxes of monsters that I love. In terms of color palette, I really love the greenish blues and whites that kind of blend into each other. It feels really vibrant and really striking and is a great way to make a good first impression. It is imposing, and especially when you see it in that intro cutscene stalking the NPC, it looks powerful and it looks strong, and it looks like something that, yes, these villagers who do not regularly hunt monsters are going to be afraid of, even if you as a hunter are going to look at this thing and see a new pair of boots. But I think my two favorite things about Chatacabra's design are that it is using I believe, a modified version of the primate skeleton, the same thing that monsters like Blangonga and Rajang use. And this is the first time we have seen an amphibian that has that kind of, like, mix of quadrupedal and bipedal movement. For the most part, the amphibians we've seen have been very low to the ground. I'm talking things like Chatacabra and Zamtrios. So it's very cool to see an amphibian class of monster using a skeleton not necessarily built for it in a way that feels right. This is something I definitely want to see Capcom do more of. I would love to see them get more creative with how they use some of the more obscure skeletons to make interesting creatures. All this to say that I think Chatacabra is a 9 out of 10 monster. And the only reason I can't give it a 10 out of 10 is because as a returning hunter, even the ramped up, tempered version of Chatacabra doesn't provide too much more in way of difficulty. He's a little bit faster, he's a little bit more aggressive, and he's got a couple more chains on his slam combos, but all that really does is give you more opportunities to offset attack him. In the future, I would be delighted if they took a Berserk Tetsukabra route and gave us a subspecies of Chatacabra that doubles down on this thing's imposing primate skeleton and turns it into a high-level bruiser. Still love this boy, and I'm going to close out the talk on Chatacabra by bringing up the fact that if you put a bomb down in front of him when he is charging at you with his tongue, he eats it and it explodes, giving me big Nibblesnarf vibes, who I miss every day. Next up, let's talk about a rooster. Of all the fire chickens I've seen in my long years of playing Monster Hunter, Quematrice is by far the fire chickeniest. The second large monster that you hunt, Quematrice is a very cool design. I like how it uses the brute wyvern skeleton and is very, very much like when you look at this thing, you see a rooster, you see a chicken. The design and silhouette are absolutely perfect. And while I haven't done too much reading on the lore, I love how the way that it uses element is primarily as a physical augmentation. It uses its tail to strike the ground like a match and send fire shooting up around it rather than having fireballs or a fire beam like something like Kutku might have. I have always personally preferred when Monster Hunter elemental monsters have the element incorporated into their physical moveset rather than just having elemental projectiles, and Quematrice does a great job of that. The fight itself is, unfortunately, nothing to really write home about. It is there primarily to introduce new players to the concept of elements and elemental damage and things like Fire Blight, while also showing off the fact that in Monster Hunter Wilds, elemental attacks and elemental damage will have an effect on the area around the fight. It will, if you are fighting Quematrice in the grasslands, Quematrice's fire moves will light the grass around you on fire, which adds an additional hazard to the map. But aside from that, Quematrice has like 3 or 4 moves total. It has a couple moves where it swooshes at you with its tail, it spins around, leaving a ring of fire around it, which you have to either dodge through or block. And I think my favorite move that it has is just a straight-up chicken peck into the ground in front of it. I can't explain it, I don't know why, but the fact that it is just so 100% just the animation of a chicken pecking something on the ground rather than like a intimidating lunge with its beak endears me to that move so much more than anything else. Another thing that really endears me to Quematrice as a monster is something that I have not even seen yet. I am 90 hours into the game, and every now and again when I'm on the Windward Plains, I will see a notification pop up that says, Arkveld and Quematrice Turf War. What business does this chicken have trying to power struggle with Arkveld? I need to see that turf war. I want to see how one-sided it is, because the audacity of this rooster to think that it has a chance. This pompous little shit. I love it. It's great. I want to see it. Quematrice is definitely one of those monsters that has a lot of personality and has a lot of redeeming and interesting qualities to me, even though the fight is nothing really to write home about. I think it is a cool design, interesting ideas and really cool looking armor, especially for me with like a bard aesthetic. I love the Quematrice hat. But all in all, I don't think I can really rank this as a pretty high monster on my list, so I gotta say, I think Quematrice is at best like a 5 out of 10, kind of middle of the road monster. It doesn't offer a whole lot in terms of fight, it has some really cool ideas, and when tempered, the difficulty gets ramped up a little bit, but all in all, it just kind of gets lost in the other much more interesting, much cooler designs that we're gonna see in the future, including the next monster we're going to talk about, Balahara. Okay, so Balahara is an interesting one for me, because there are very few monsters in Monster Hunter Wilds that I don't like fighting. Balahara is one of them, and it's a damn shame because I do really like Balahara's design. I think the way that this thing is meant to kind of resemble industrial equipment almost, with its drill bit tail and its I don't remember what it's called, but the tri-gear like dredging machinery that it has to its face. I think it is a really striking design and a cool way to use a Leviathan in a way that makes sense for it to burrow through the sand. There are a lot of sand digging monsters in Monster Hunter that you just kind of have to suspend your disbelief a little bit. Like, how Diablos burrows through the sand with its frame and structure, I could not tell you, but I can totally believe that Balahara, either on its own or as a horde, would be tunneling through the sand like water. The color palette to me is pretty boring. I don't particularly like it. Just a lot of grays and browns. I would have liked for it to be a little more striking in color, and that's an issue that I have with the next two monsters that I'm going to be talking about. I think Chatacabra and Quematrice are both very, fun color palettes that, bring a lot out and draw your eye, whereas Balahara is just kind of boring to me. And in terms of the fight, it's just a fight that I can kind of turn my brain off. I don't really need to engage with the fight all that much. It's got a few very cool moves. One of my personal favorites is when it propels itself across the arena by its tail like a spear. That is incredibly fun. I like when it goes up on the rock pillars and you have to either shoot it down or pull the rocks down in order to, bring it back to the fight. But aside from that, it just kind of has your bog standard physical landlocked Leviathan moveset, a couple tail swaps, a couple lunges at you with its claws. I do like how it will poise its tail up to strike at you and use it like a piercing weapon. I do think that's really neat, but it doesn't do enough to fully make the monster enjoyable for me. And I understand there's a lot of people who like it. I unfortunately am not one of them. This is probably the monster I'm going to spend the least time talking about today. Because in general, he's just kind of to me. I'm going to put him, honestly, a little bit lower than Quematrice. I'm going to put Balahara as a 4 out of 10 in terms of, well, no, I don't know if I can do that. I think they're both just kind of okay monsters. So I'll say 5 out of 10 for Balahara as well. I think it would have been better if Balahara was also a horde monster. I think having to deal with a lot of Balahara at once, rather than just one at a time, would make the fight a lot more hectic, it would be a lot more interesting, and it would be a lot less brain off in terms of fight. Especially since you see in most of the cutscenes where Balahara is present, you see a bunch of them at a time. It's incredibly strange to me that you don't have to fight them with horde mechanics. But I also kind of think the horde mechanics were a little oversold in the marketing. And the next monster that I'm going to be talking about is a prime example of that. Going to be talking about Doshaguma next. Now, I still think Doshaguma should be pronounced Doshaguma. It rolls off the tongue better, but I'm not a localizer, not my call. Doshaguma was the monster that we saw the most in advertising, or at least that I saw the most in early advertising, and was the poster child of the horde monster, whatever you want to call it, mechanic that Monster Hunter Wilds was touting. The first time you see Doshaguma is in the announcement trailer, where a whole pack of them is chasing after the hunter. One of the main beta quests that you had to do in the lead up to Monster Hunter Wilds was fight an Alpha Doshaguma and its entire pack, and a big part of it was showing you how to do the mechanics to lead the monster away from its pack, whether it be with a large dung pod or by luring it into a sand trap, or all these things that you could do to get the monster on its own. And they really made it seem like the hordes were going to be much more present in the game, where I think right now we have Doshaguma, we have Hirobami, who I'll talk about later, and we have Kutku, who I'm not going to be talking about in these main videos. And of those three, the only ones where it feels like the horde is actually a real threat is Hirobami. The first time you fight Doshaguma in the story, you are fighting an Alpha Doshaguma, and there is a very big lead up where you are seeing the damage that this herd of monsters is doing, and you have to separate it from the pack. I was expecting it to be very much like the beta quest, where you were given in-game tutorials and expected to use the mechanics to separate the Alpha Doshaguma from its herd before you took it down. Instead, it was a very on-rails, almost just cinematic, where the Alpha Doshaguma is separated from the rest of the pack, and then you take it down. You fight it one-on-one, and throughout that entire hunt, it never reconnects with its pack, and I think that was a mistake, because later hunts, when you do them outside of that story quest, when you fight an Alpha Doshaguma, yes, it is very easy to disperse the pack using a large dung pod, but later in the hunt, whenever you come across another Doshaguma on the field, it will join in the fight. It will link back up with the Alpha Doshaguma, and you will have to do that process again. And I like the way that was handled, I just wish it were a little bit more present. I do, however, get story-wise why they handled the Doshaguma herd specifically that way, because later in the game you learn that the Doshaguma herd is kind of held together by spit and not by anything else. They are not like a unified, cohesive group. They are just like a bunch of individuals grouping together because it is more beneficial for them than like hunting on their own. So there's no loyalty, there's no like mob boss mentality. Even though I still like to look at Doshaguma and like think of them with like the mafia like hired goon voice. And that is like the one pitfall that I think Doshaguma has as a monster, because when you get into the fight, oh, I love how relentless Doshaguma is. It does not stop. It keeps attacking you. It keeps the pressure on. You have to get really good with like taking advantage of very small windows, or capitalizing on the opportunity to, if you're using a guarding weapon, power clash it and knock it back, or if you're using a weapon with offset attacks, knock it away and use those parries to your advantage. Doshaguma is a great, like, middle tier of difficulty monster that does something very similar to Chatacabra, where it, instead of teaching you these mechanics, it is testing them. Chatacabra was showing you how to do all these moves in slow motion, and then Doshaguma is testing you on how to do them at full speed. It is a very good fight design in that way. And again, I love physical powerhouse monsters, and Doshaguma is a very physical-based attacker. I love how barbarian-coded he is with his, massive powerful slams, how he charges at you, like, face in the dirt, mouth open, just running at you. Even if that move has some wonky tracking where there are times where I feel like I should be able to get out of the way, but don't. He is a great use of that, like, bare-fanged beast skeleton in a way that feels like a threat. Capcom has been on a roll lately with, like, mid-tier difficulty bear monsters. We had Ghost Harag in Rise, and now we have Doshaguma in Wilds. And in terms of design, it is very, like, creepy and alien, but in a very grounded way. It's got that, like, it's got the bare frame, it has some, like, lion-like design choices with the big mane of fur and the pack mechanic. And then it's just, like, it's squashed, like, pug-like face, where you can't even see the eyes over its, like, folds of skin. It's a cool-looking, gross-looking monster, and I really enjoy that a lot. Doshaguma, to me, is a solid, like, sitting between 7 and 8 out of 10, like a 7.5 out of 10 monster. I think if the herd mechanics were a little more present in its fight, I think if it weren't so easy to disperse the herd with a large dung pod, it would be like a solid like 8 or 9 out of 10 for me. But with how it is right now, just kind of a very, very solid, very cool monster. So we've had a 9 out of 10 with Chatacabra, we've had 2 5s out of 10s with Quematrice and Balahara, and now a 7.5 with Doshaguma. I think it's time we talk about our first 10 out of 10 monster in Monster Hunter Wilds. Of course, I am talking about Ray Bloody Dow. There's a reason that when Ray Dow was first shown off in one of the original trailers, people thought it was the flagship. There's a reason that Ray Dow was the big final boss of the first beta. Ray Dow rips. Ray Dow is amazing. Ray Dow is one of the coolest, best fights in base game Monster Hunter Wilds. And in another reality, Ray Dow was the flagship of the game and everyone was super cool with it. The apex of the Windward Plains, Ray Dow is a physical embodiment of the Sand Tide, this lightning storm that rolls in, decimates the countryside, before vanishing and never returning. Something I really like about the apex monsters in this game, that it kind of makes them a pain to crown hunt, but that's a video for another day, is the fact that they only show up during their inclement weather, and then vanish afterwards, unless you are in the middle of fighting them. I think it's a good way to prevent people from just, like, going out during the times where it is not as dangerous, where you don't risk being struck by lightning, where the map is a lot prettier, all that stuff. And even in the darkness of this, like, this constant sand and lightning storm, Ray Dow shines out like a light. The vibrant gold of its scales is incredibly striking, and even in the darkness sticks out enough that you get a good look at him wherever you are. And that is doubled down on whenever it is either using its lightning-based attacks or being struck by lightning, because it frequently gets struck by lightning out in the field and just does not seem to care. It's great. And I love how it takes the Flying Wyvern frame, the, bipedal on 2 legs, wing arms, long tail, big ol' head, and does something unique with it. I have never seen, outside of Monster Hunter Frontier, I have never seen a Flying Wyvern attack with its wings as much in the way that Ray Dow does. The move where it swoops at you with its wing and attempts to pummel you with it is a standout move of mine. And it is impossible to talk about Ray Dow without talking about the railgun. When its horns close around its face and it channels electricity into a concentrated beam at you, it is an incredibly cool move that I wish were a little harder to avoid. It has kind of 2 different flavors of this attack. It has a couple very, short, smaller bursts that it will blast at you from the sky, one after the other. And then it has its big, concentrated laser that it has to ground itself for and then fire at you, giving you, way too much time to get clear of the blast zone. There aren't many times in the game where I have been hit by that attack, and I think if I had one complaint about Ray Dow's fight, it would be that I would like for that move to either charge faster or for him to be able to chain that from a different move so that it can catch hunters off guard a little bit more. I think that would make the fight a little bit tougher and definitely a lot more engaging if you know you have to constantly be watching out for those big railgun blasts. But another thing that I really appreciate about Ray Dow is at the point you fight him in the story, Ray Dow is the only Flying Wyvern you fight. And I'm not even just talking about the Flying Wyvern skeleton. There are no monsters that fly, aside from Ray Dow, up to that point in the story. And compared to a lot of the other Monster Hunter rosters, where a majority of the early game creatures you fight are some flavor of bird or Flying Wyvern with different bits attached onto them, it was very refreshing to see a game where so much of the roster is grounded, unique takes on, kind of lesser used skeletons. The fact that we don't see Rathalos and Rathian in Monster Hunter Wilds until high rank, until you have cleared the entire story and met all these new creatures, was, I think, one of the best decisions that Capcom could have made. Let us live with these new creatures before bringing back the old mainstays. It gives them so much more weight and so much more presence. I said before that Rei Dao is a 10 out of 10 monster, and I stand by that. I love its fight, I love its design, I love its weapons and gear. Even if I wish its set bonus were a little bit better, I don't know how useful latent power is in this game, but historically it's not a very commonly used skill. But I really like the aesthetics and I really like the design. And that is it for the original monsters of the Windward Plains. Like I said at the start of this video, I am going to be mostly focusing on original monsters in this series. At the end, I'm going to do a video where I talk about the returning monsters, but I want to highlight the original creatures in these maps first. My plan right now is to release each of these videos. I am working on all of them at once, effectively. I am going to be releasing these videos once a week until I am done with all 5 of the main maps in Monster Hunter Wilds, and then I'm going to talk about the returning monsters and potentially title update monsters if the first title update has happened by the time the last video comes out. It probably will, because I know they said early April. But that is where I will wrap up this video. Please let me know what you think about the monsters of the Windward Plains. I think they are probably my least favorite of all of the monsters in total. I think the designs and the fights get a lot more interesting as the game progresses, but I still think there are some great standouts, and a lot of them do really cool things. So let me know in the comments what you think. Thank you all so much for watching and being patient with me as I worked on this video. I will be honest, I had a really tough time figuring out how I wanted to do my talk about the monsters in Wilds. It was either this, or sit down with a couple friends and kind of talk about the roster in its entirety, but that video, taking a look at my recording time, that video would have probably been about like 2-3 hours long. So yeah, thank you all again so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to. Don't if you don't. And until next time, I'll see you next time.